In this video, we're going to discuss hearing loss and the brain. Specifically, we're going to unpack the peer-reviewed article, Reorganized Brain Functional Network Topology in Presbycusis. My name's Carrie Rogers, and I am a Ph.D. and also a Certified Professional Accessibility Core Competencies. And today I'm hoping to make explicit what we might consider to be the implicit. And so the article that we're looking at today was written by 9 authors. The first author, last name is Guan. This article was published in 2022, as we can see here. And the title is Reorganized Brain Functional Network Topology in Presbycusis. The journal that it is in the Frontiers of Aging Neuroscience, and it is the 14th volume, and this would be the technical page number. If you click on this link, it will take you to the article. Now, this article is peer-reviewed. What that means is that the article has been read and critiqued by at least 3 qualified experts. These are peer reviewers who have usually a terminal degree or the highest degree possible in their field of study. They have been vetted by scholars who are members of the journal's review board. And the peer reviewers will always request revisions or clarifications. And more often than not, an article will generally be not even asked to be revised. So outright rejection is often possible, especially in these very well-known journals like Frontiers in Aging Neuroscience. The study that we're looking at today is an empirical study, which means it is a study that collects new data and it creates new knowledge, as compared to like a literature review, which is analyzing knowledge that has been created. And you can learn more about Frontiers in Aging Neuroscience by clicking on this link. So let's first talk about presbycusis. So it's pres as in president, B as in bumblebee, Q as in barbecue, and the stress is on the Q syllable, and cis as in sister. So presbycusis. And this is defined as age-relating hearing loss resulting from sensorineural decline. So this isn't like conductive hearing loss, which can be caused by like earwax or an object in the ear. This is caused by age-related changes due to those little hairs in the semicircular canals, the cilia, that no longer are functioning the way that to pick up the sound as normal. So why is it important to really explore the relationship between presbycusis and brain functioning? So presbycusis, or hearing loss, affects 2/3 of adults over 70. It is also the most common cause of hearing loss worldwide. And so as we think about this and we think about what we know about cognitive functioning, we know that older adults also sometimes have trouble with cognitive functioning. We know about Alzheimer's and related dementias. And so there may be a connection here, and we need to explore that. And so in this study, what the researchers did was they took 110 participants, okay? So that is their sample, 110 participants out of all of the available folks older than 60. 55 of these folks were male and 55 identified as female. They gave each one of these people a hearing test, and they gave them a cognitive assessment, which I'll talk about in a second. Based on the results of both the hearing test and the cognitive assessment, they were put into one of 3 groups. So the first group were called healthy controls. They had no hearing loss, and they could hear sounds at about 18 decibels. And that would be like a really quiet watch ticking or a really quiet rustling of leaves or falling of leaves. These folks also exhibited no impairment when it came to cognition and memory. Now, those with presbycusis or hearing loss, they could hear sounds about 33 decibels, and that would be, a decent whisper in the library. And they had no cognitive impairment at this point. Now, the third group here, the bottom group, they have both presbycusis or hearing loss and cognitive impairment. They hear the same sounds as the folks in the group above, but they have cognitive impairment, okay? And that cognitive impairment was measured by the outcomes of the cognitive assessment they did, which was the MoCA, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. And many, if you're over about 45 or 50, you may have seen this given to either, your parent or potentially yourself even. This is a tool specifically to kind of screen cognitive functioning. It takes about 7 to 10 minutes. It's highly predictive of mild cognitive impairment and early Alzheimer's. And what it does is it looks at 13 tasks across 8 different domains. So we look at your attention and concentration. We look at your executive functioning, your memory, your language, visual construction skills, conceptual thinking, math calculations, and orientation to time and place. What is the year? Where are you? Etc. Can you name, for example, that's a horse versus a tiger or a duck? Can you draw the cube? Can you connect 1A, 2B, 3C, etc.? Those types of things. So after we got everybody into our groups, we ended up having a total of 50 participants here that have no hearing loss, and their cognitive functioning is fine. Then we have our second group, which has hearing loss with no cognitive decline. There's 30 participants, 14 males and 16 females. And then in our last group is that hearing loss with cognitive decline group. And that has 12 males and 18 females. Now, every single person in this study is at least 60 years old. They are all right-handed, so sorry, Southpaws, you were excluded. And they at least completed an 8th grade education. So what happened in this study? This study was what we call observational. There was no intervention, no medication was taken. We didn't try giving a group a different type of hearing aid or teaching them a new skill. We were just observing. Every single one of these participants sat in an MRI, laid down in an MRI machine above here, and they looked at their brains in what's called the resting state. And the resting state is when you're not really thinking about something in particular, you're not really trying to do a specific task in your brain. You're not trying to carry out conversation or anything. It's just your brain at rest or your default mode. And they mapped out what the structures of the topology or topography. Think about a topographic map of the brain. They also looked at the connection between different regions of the brain. Now, this image is from another study, but I put it in just to give you an idea of what these images might look like. Okay? Now, what was interesting was they found that participants with hearing loss here had less efficient and more disorganized brain networks. But they found that those participants that had both hearing loss and cognitive decline, they had the most disruptive networks in their brains. Now, this is really interesting because the big picture here is really hearing loss changes how the brain is structured. Now, this isn't going to be like, oh, my brainstem is in a different location. No, not at all. We're talking about some of those basic networks of how information is communicated back and forth between different regions, okay? And these brain changes related to hearing loss appear much earlier than memory problems. And what we're understanding is that this is a compensatory strategy for the brain. You can't hear very well, and so your brain is trying to compensate for what it cannot hear. And so the brain communication becomes more inefficient when there is hearing loss. And especially when there's cognitive decline already present, because you don't have the ability to do this compensatory strategy of having other regions take over effectively. And what we're noticing is that the areas of the brain that are responsible for attention and higher level thinking, so think prefrontal cortex, that front part of your brain by your forehead, those are working so hard to compensate for hearing loss. And if you already have cognitive decline, those higher level thinking skills, attention, executive functioning in the prefrontal cortex, we're noticing that you don't have those same levels of abilities that you had before cognitive decline. So that brings us to, what does hearing loss then feel like? As we think about engaging with another individual, when we think about, a psychology class at college or, with students, how do we engage with our students? But we can also apply this to adults. How do we engage with adults, especially those with hearing loss? So people with hearing loss are actually working harder to participate in conversations. And that conversation may feel exhausting for them. Imagine trying to fill in the blanks like you're playing Hangman or Wheel of Fortune every single time somebody opens their mouth and is talking. And you're trying to fill in the sounds that you can't hear. When you think about the TH or the PH sound, th, sh, those types are in the b versus p. These are sounds that become very difficult to distinguish. And it takes a lot of work, okay? And it's exhausting. And background noise can be completely overwhelming for someone that's trying to do all this work right now to engage in this conversation. And when you're having to do all of this cognitive work to hear the words, let alone try to understand what the words mean in the context and, coherently participate in this conversation, these spoken words that you're struggling to hear are going to be less likely to be remembered because you've put your available cognitive capacity on hearing and compensating for hearing loss rather than making sense and participating and engaging. And this means that because more of that effort is spent on hearing words, it's leaving less cognitive reserve available for active engagement, for memory, and for higher level thinking. And so really, what questions do we now still have, as I'm thinking about this? And I have to keep in mind, this is one article. Okay, and there are thousands of articles out there. And some of this information of these questions that I now have may already be under investigation and study. But one of the things that I am beginning to wonder, and I want to look up more, is to what extent might hearing aids actually preserve brain structure? And would the earlier we use a hearing aid, the more brain structure be preserved? I'm not quite sure. And can the brain restore itself to pre-hearing loss structure with hearing aid wearing compliance? We talk about how the brain is dynamic and how it is able to do a lot of repair. And so is that possible? How might other or additional strategies support cognitive functioning with hearing loss? Apple has this great tool called live captions on phones. Could using something like this in a conversation or, closed captioning, when the TV is on, or some other skill possibly help older adults to retain more information and support that cognitive functioning? Can quiet environments help to preserve memory and cognitive functioning? If there's a ton of noise that's bombarding someone all the time, could that be contributing to that decline? And can early treatment slow that cognitive decline overall? And so I'm hoping now that you're beginning to kind of realize and understand, yeah, I'm working harder if I have hearing loss. And having an appreciation of what those challenges are, and really some questions and directions of where we can go from here.